You can have a more tailored service offering by region of the world, by the types of products. You have a ton of flexibility to create the optimal service offering to your customers at very aggressive prices while you're still making bigger margin.
Today, the audience we're talking to is going to be 3PLs. And I think some of the challenges and opportunities that 3PLs have to grow cross-border, right? And so we won't do a huge introduction, but Kermit, as in, yes, Kermit the Frog, tons of experience with 3PLs. We actually had a conversation around selecting a 3PL. And then we also have Nick McBride, and of course, Aaron Bezzant, my co-host today. Welcome.
I'm excited about this one.
Aaron, do you know why 3PLs struggle to get out of their international contracts?
Why is that?
Because they're boxed in.
No. Blake, we might need a little drum roll on that one or something.
He's just never, we need our own buttons. Okay. All right. So let's get going here.
There we go. All right. So there's one thing on this one I wanted to kind of touch on right out of the gate. And that is, as a 3PL, you're fulfilling orders for your customers. You're really good domestically. But a very common thing we see is merchants say, I want to grow internationally. And they come to you as a 3PL and say, hey, can you help me grow internationally? And when they do that, what are some of the challenges that face the 3PL in helping that merchant? Because 3PL is naturally going to be the first stop, I think, in a lot of merchants' minds. And so, yeah, Nick, talk through that a little bit. Like, what's kind of that conversation look like for most 3PLs?
Yeah, I think it is the first stop that merchants are going to go to, right? It's the business that they've allocated to handle all of their fulfillment, warehousing needs, any of that. And when they want to expand internationally, they're going to go directly to that 3PL first for advice, for recommendations on what to do. And generally, a 3PL's volume is 90 to 95% domestic. So that's what they're really good at. And so 3PL is going to have a couple different options of where they can recommend that customer, what they can recommend to do, right? That can be just shipping DDU using the carrier options they have. Some 3PLs will offer DDP services, right? So they can have the duties and taxes billed back to the merchant. So the end consumer isn't responsible for paying those duties and taxes. That can create a better international shopping experience. And then some 3PLs use third-party providers as well. Those can be companies like Zonos. It can be companies like Passport, Globally, other things like that, where they can basically outsource some of that responsibility around creating customs documentation, other things that go on with those international shipments, and kind of take some of that responsibility away from the 3PL and pass it on to more of an expert.
So I want to unpack that a little bit. Two of those points. So the option is just send it DDU, which means that's bare bones with 3PL. If they can figure out how to do all the labeling and paperwork for international, which some of them even struggle with that, that can be because since they're so focused on domestic. But let's say they can process all the paperwork, and then I think we've had plenty of conversations on previous podcasts how of all the struggles of doing it DDU. But that's like bare bones. Get started. Have the duty and taxes due at delivery, and all the complications that go along with that, but it's simple for the 3PL and the merchant to get started. But if they go DDP, where the 3PL will now bill the merchant for the duty and taxes instead of having it collected on delivery, now the merchant's left with the problem of, well, how do I calculate and collect that duty and tax at checkout so the shopper pays it there, right? And the 3PL, if they needed to solve that problem, how would they go about doing that?
Well, let me jump in and just take one step back for a moment. You'd be amazed at how many 3PLs actually have a separate and second line for just international orders. So instead of processing international orders through their typical line and flow, they will actually say, oh, this is an international order. They put it in a separate conveyor to take it to a different station altogether. So it creates a secondary process to manage those international orders. So that's the first thing that's really a difficult aspect for them. And then secondarily to that is they have to decide whether this is a DD or a DDP shipment for sure. But for those DDP shipments, it creates another level of complexity because now that it creates a whole new financial problem for them and how they have to manage those transactions. Because no longer is it just simply a matter of collecting a transportation bill, they add their markup to it for that particular merchant, and then they invoice. That invoice process has to be split now. So now they have to invoice for the transportation costs. Then they receive a secondary invoice in for those duties and taxes that they agreed to pay on behalf of that customer, that they have to bill that merchant. And that typically happens 2 to 3 weeks or maybe a month after the fact. That creates confusion now with their customers because the merchant said, I already got a bill for the transportation costs. Now, why are you sending me another bill for the same package, the same shipment for the same customer 2 or 3 weeks later? So there's a whole layer of complications that exist around managing that international business that's more than just the label. But the label and the customs documentation is yet a third aspect of this whole process, which becomes quite a management problem for them.
How do you think you would summarize the problems a merchant is hiring a 3PL to solve for them, right? Like I still don't know if that's clear. One of those that come to my mind is the merchant. What are they trying? What's their goal? What's the outcome they're trying to get here? They want more orders. In order to do that, they want duties and taxes paid. When? At checkout. So now, like, there's this technology problem, right, where they need to get those duties and taxes at checkout, and then they also need, all the documentation, everything filled out correctly. It feels like this is where I think international is unique for 3PLs versus domestic. There's this intersection of technology and fulfillment that happens that isn't quite as, like, not everybody, but a lot of customers can just do flat rate shipping or something else domestically, and the 3PL can do fulfillment. When a merchant's making a decision for international, they're looking to solve the problem on their website first, and then they start looking for providers. And Nick, I mean, you kind of talked about that. So when a merchant's looking for international, what are usually their options out there?
Yeah, so normally you can either go direct with the carrier with a DDP option. Generally, that incurs some risk around, right? Like you talked about getting the calculations.
They got to calculate
that money, right? Like there's risk involved.
So if they go directly with the carrier, what are their options then to get duty and tax at checkout?
Yeah, it depends on the e-commerce platform, really. Some of the off the shelf Shopify's and stuff may have a very basic calculator built in that you can just use. Sometimes there's other applications you can download. Some of the carriers
are there
DHL
other applications though? Like what name one?
DHL has an application you can download that will do that's tax calculations.
Yep. So that's not, again, we're talking specifically about if you want to choose your own carrier.
Yeah.
Right. Like what options do you have out there? So the DHL one's obviously limited, right? It's a DHL calculator.
Assuming even the 3PL actually offers DHL as part of their portfolio
right.
services.
So, I mean, really and this goes to, Zonos is the only company really in the world that is a truly, totally carrier agnostic product that is built into as an interface directly with the merchant, right? Like there's others, you could use an Avalara or something else, but Avalara's not going to have an app on the Shopify App Store, right? Like that's not going to be a thing.
Yeah, I mean, you do have the Shopify Markets, duty and tax.
Right, like the pre-built in calculator thing.
We've seen that. I mean, that's better than nothing, for sure. But it's we've seen some cases where it doesn't take into account all the nuances of cross-border from carrier to carrier. There's different fee structures and things involved, and we've seen some customers lose money on that. But yeah, it sounds to me like it's if you want to have it open to use whatever carrier you want, like Zonos is about the only option out there.
I was just going to say that for most e-commerce managers, though, as they're managing their web store, for them to actually make an upgrade to something like a Shopify Markets from where they're currently at is a fairly involved process. That upgrade process is not an overnight type of situation. So more often than not, what they typically do is they'll look at saying, how can I create a different pricing structure where I do some sort of I increase my price for certain countries for my products, And that creates a little bit of a contentious environment for their customers, because their customers land on their site, see one price. Then when they actually go to check out from a different country, they see a totally different price. So that creates confusion. The other concern that I have is that not all of the e-commerce platforms offer that as even a service. So now I'm stuck with either having to eat that cost of those duties and taxes, take that risk that Nick was talking about by shipping a product over there and hoping that they actually pay the duty and tax, or I've got to find someone else who actually can manage all this for me. And as you said, Clint, the only company out there that can manage all this for us right now is Zonos.
If you want to select your own carrier now, now to the other options. If you don't want to select your own carrier and you're just like, look, I just want to outsource. I'm looking for this tech to solve this technology problem. Now, what are my options? Which is
you just bundle.
There's
lots of companies that bundle shipping costs with the duty and tax, right? Those are there's a number of options out there. And you mentioned the passports, the global ease. Those are some of the ones we see regularly in the 3PL space. There's a Flavor Cloud. There's in the App Store, you can find some that are just basically resellers.
So you get those rates. You're the merchant. You get those rates.
That's it.
Okay.
But now I'm wondering, what does that? It feels like it might create some conflict.
How does that impact the 3PL, right? Because we talked earlier about how do 3PLs make money, right? Transportation is usually one of those. So what happens when a third party comes in that is doing? They're also another middleman for transportation because they're not actually the transportation provider.
They're reselling to a reseller.
Reselling to a reseller.
Yeah. Well, and generally what I see is there is some margin there for 3PLs, but it's a lot less than their current contracts.
So what would be an example of there being, so a Global might do a rev share or something like that, or?
Yeah. So Global may do a rev share. A Passport may actually give them a lower shipping cost and they can resell that with some margin in there.
So it is like Aaron said, it's a reseller that's reselling.
A reseller that's reselling.
But the aggregate of that volume that they're now making is less than what they would have made if they'd have managed that whole transportation themselves.
And I think one of the big aspects too is if you get to a really good 3PL and a 3PL that really knows international, they have, and even businesses that really know international, they have specific carriers they want to use in specific areas, right? Maybe a DHL Ecom is the right option for Southeast Asia, but a Direct Link is the right option for Canada. And there's different advantages to different carriers in different areas. And being limited to just one carrier option and having to use that really creates restraints around this 3PL and what they can do. And it eliminates the ability to do rate shopping on the back end. Sometimes, right, these providers have limitations on where they can offer DDP shipments to, or what specific HS codes they'll even provide these options to, right? I've seen brands where they introduce a new product and a company that's a merchant of record solution won't actually accept that product to be shipped DDP with them.
And a Globally is the typical kind of main merchant of record. Type solution. Yeah, so it might not fit all your customers, and here you're creating a partnership with somebody, and it doesn't fit everybody if it's a merchant of record type solution.
I have a thought. How cool would it be for a 3PL to have the ability to go in and say, we offer this portfolio of carriers that are customizable, that can serve every region of the world in the least cost routed way, so that you're not tied to one or two or three carriers, but maybe you actually have 8 or 10 different carriers that can be highly specialized for your product for a particular region of the world that you're shipping to, that the price is on the fly managed such that you can offer that discount to your customers at time of checkout. That may be a better price than what you would have gotten if you'd have just stuck with a single type carrier. So in that world that Zonos operates in, that's kind of the unique advantage, is that you're not married to a specific carrier for a specific region. You can open the world up to multiple carriers and provide that feedback to your customer in the way of a reduced price.
Yeah, is it safe to say that international shipments actually have a better margin for 3PLs on the shipping costs than the domestic?
Absolutely. Those lanes of service are much more costly, and so there is a lot more profit margin built into those. That's especially true for maybe the major carriers.
How much would let's give me some examples here. How much on average do you think a 3PL might make in transportation on a domestic shipment?
20 to 25%.
Okay, so that could be $2 to $3, maybe $2 to $5, something like that
So
per shipment.
on a domestic move, it's around $10. They would make about $2.
Okay. Internationally,
It's more like 35%.
yeah. But then also the shipping costs are higher.
The shipping costs are higher. So a typical international move might be anywhere from $25 to $35 for a major carrier. And that carrier is now putting in $3 to $5 per shipment.
And I think what's important is these express carriers, especially, and also it's also true for the non-express carriers. They are wanting to compete with Global E and Passport. They feel like those are their competitors because they're out there. They feel like competition. They will come in and beat those rates in most cases. As long as you have volume, I've not seen a case, I think, where or rarely that a 3PL can't negotiate a better rate than what that reseller essentially is going to offer the 3PL.
Well, there's fewer mouths to feed, right? So you don't have two different middlemen in the taking margin on that. They can get more aggressive and give you the opportunity. And it's not just about rates. Yes, you can make more margin as a 3PL, but you can also offer a more competitive service to your customers. And if you have the volume to justify it, you can have a more tailored service offering by region of the world, by the types of products. You have a ton of flexibility to create the optimal service offering to your customers at very aggressive prices while you're still making bigger margin.
Absolutely. But for most 3PLs, they choose the easy button. Most 3PLs out of the gate will offer one or two of the express carrier options. They typically don't go too deep into the other regional type of carriers where maybe they should make a much stronger investment. And so in that fashion, that's the one thing that I think Zonos does differently is because we educate our 3PLs as part of this international offering. We educate them on who those regional carriers are, what services they can provide to enhance the portfolio of services that they can offer to their merchants. That's something that they're not going to get anywhere else because any of the other carriers are going to be somewhat self-serving. They're actually going to focus on how can they take over more of the transportation costs or the transportation volume of business from that 3PL. So they're going to want to do that for the whole world. The Zonos training process or the education process that we go through is to help those 3PLs recognize that there are many logistics players out there that we can support them internationally that will allow them to offer a better price, a better solution for that lane of service to that merchant, for that ultimate customer in that particular destination, that gives them a much broader focus of those transportation options, which I think in the long run will reduce the cost to the customer, which increases the sales, which increases the volume of business of shipping that 3PL is managing. And that's a win-win for all three parties involved in that equation.
Would you say, you mentioned something about an easy button. I think, tell me if this is accurate. A lot of 3PLs will pick an easy button, but just an all-in solution, whether it be a Passport or Globally or whatever it may be, they're willing to give up that margin stuff just to offer something. Mm-hmm. And because 95% of their business is still domestic, they just want to give their customers something, even if it's not the perfect thing. They just want to have something to offer. Is that typically what you're seeing?
Absolutely.
And maybe the extra effort to build something out. Like if they wanted to offer a whole solution, they'd have to have their own calculators at checkout and all sorts of things, which I think would be a bit too much to ask for the majority of 3PLs out there. But ideally for them to check the boxes, if they could have a robust solution for their merchants to calculate at checkout and have an easy button for fulfillment that would leverage their network of providers that they want to have a direct relationship with, that would kind of be the best of everything, right?
I think it's similar to the conversation we were having on the previous podcast about why merchants decide to use a 3PL. And I think one of the biggest reasons is where you can put your focus, right? From a brand's perspective, from a merchant's perspective, they don't want to put the effort toward being an expert on shipping. So they allocate that to a third party to be able to handle that for them. I think it's the same thing in the 3PL world with international, right? They want to be an expert in what they do: pick, pack, ship, fulfilling those products. When it comes to the technology aspect, the duty and or the tax registration, getting proper tax IDs in foreign countries, getting a front-end interface to calculate these duties and taxes, that's not their primary goal. And being able to pass that on to a company like Zonos and having the flexibility to still do what they do best in selecting carriers, picking, packing, doing the operational things that they're very efficient at, it's a very similar decision to like a merchant using a 3PL for their shipping is for a 3PL using Zonos for the technology aspect.
So let's dive in then to, because I do think it's very relevant for the 3PL conversation. What can Zonos offer, and what does it look like for 3PLs? What options do they have if they're working with Zonos? I mean, I think first and foremost, the decision the 3PL wants to make is, I want to control my own shipping carriers. If the answer to that is no, we're probably not the right fit, right?
Right.
Okay, so, all right. If you're listening to this and the answer is yes, now what is, how can Zonos help then a 3PL? Kermit touched on one of the things, which is the education around and possibly introductions to the right carriers, right, that they need to select. You talked about the front end interface part. Like, we're going to obviously check that box. What are their, how does these programs work with Zonos, and how does it then benefit that 3PL and the merchant at scale?
Yeah, I think from an initial phase part, right? One thing that the 3PL needs to worry about is ensuring that product goes through customs efficiently. One of those things that 3PL is going to need is proper documentation. And to create that documentation, there's certain things they need to provide, such as a proper HS code, product descriptions, and things like that. Sometimes they're relying on either the supplier to provide them with the HS code or the merchant. And a lot of the times those are bad HS codes. They're either not even valid codes or they're incorrect, which is going to cause issues at the border. Zonos can solve that problem really early on for them by providing accurate HS codes, by providing customs descriptions for those products. So that's kind of a first level kind of interaction, right? Is we can solve the data piece going into the commercial invoices, ensuring those products are going to clear properly. I think a big secondary aspect along with that clearance is tax ID numbers. Again, Zonos, what we can do for 3PLs is the merchant and the 3PL can use Zonos's IOS number, our UK VAT ID number, our VOEC number going into Norway to ensure these low value goods do clear into the country and get the preferred clearance.
I'm glad you brought that one up, because merchants are coming to 3PLs as their first stop. They're their trusted fulfillment partner. They're going to be asking a lot of questions of these 3PLs about compliance. They're relying on the 3PL to do the proper documentation. They're relying on the 3PL to educate them and about these tax remittance laws. They're like, hey, I've heard about this, going into this country or that country. And the 3PL often will not have the answers for them. And that's why they might defer to an easy button solution elsewhere. But that's a super relevant one, is the tax remittance and tax IDs, where that's all handled by Zonos as well. I think it's hard to overstate that enough. That's an increasing complexity that's happening in the cross-border landscape that didn't even exist 6 or 7 years ago. But it's becoming more and more relevant as each year passes. And so the Zonos program, if we talk about Zonos taking care of the front end, calculating everything at checkout, taking care of all the tax remittance, so the documentation, and the 3PL doesn't have to worry about it. We can handle the documentation, and even make it so that the fulfillment process feels as simple as domestic for the 3PL using their carriers, right? And even the billing, right? The billing is something you mentioned that earlier around the duty and tax billing. Talk a little bit about how we can help with that.
I think that's actually a huge thing, is the fact that we unobligate that 3PL from the liability associated with those duties and taxes that have been paid.
So they don't have to collect it from the merchant.
They don't have to collect it from the merchant, which significantly reduces their time in terms of management on the back end for those financial collection of those duties and taxes from the merchant. We also obligate them for those taxes because they're not going to receive that tax bill. That tax bill would ultimately come to Zonos as part of our service offering. And why that's important is 3PLs billing is something that they have to do to recover their transportation costs that they're actually outlaying up front, that they're going to get billed on in 7 days. And then they're going to turn around and bill that merchant who may actually have a net 30 with them. So they're carrying a significant burden of transportation costs. And if it's a high volume shipper, that's a fairly substantial amount of money. You add the duty and tax to that becomes a very large sum that they feel obligated to. And in the event that there was a problem with that merchant, where they shipped out a large volume of business, and then at the end of the month when they get that tax bill, and there's another round of invoicing that has to take place, if that merchant is having some financial difficulty, that doesn't unobligate that 3PL from that liability. So we actually unburden that liability from that merchant, which I think is another huge boon for the relationship that they would have with Zonos.
So if I was to summarize, I've probably summarized this a couple of times, but as you're talking about this, it just feels like it becomes super clear that the final objective that I think these 3PLs are going to be looking for is, I want to use my own carriers, my own rates. I want control over the logistics. I'm a 3PL. And then I have three really key barriers to doing this. One is, I don't have a front-end integration for duty and tax. I don't have a checkout that can, calculate duty and tax and be the merchant of record, any of that's solved for with Zonos. The second one is getting the documentation right, the tax IDs on there, like just the whole clearance process. And then the third, which I thought was really important that you brought up, Aaron, is the billing. And the fact that now they don't even have to worry about collecting that duty and tax because we have a connection with that merchant. And so once those three things are solved, guess what you can do now? You can now just go negotiate rates and start offering that to your merchants.
And I think there's two other sides of our program that's worth talking to as well. And just by nature, our relationship with a number of different logistics providers, carriers that are out there. If you're a 3PL and you haven't done a lot of international, maybe you haven't negotiated a lot of rates. We have a lot of partners we'd be more than happy to introduce you to that are very excited about working with 3PLs. They'd love to come in and give you some great rates. So the other side of it is we do have a rev share too. So not only are you going to be making your normal margins and making bigger margins on the freight and logistics, we're willing to do a rev share with you as well. And you're
saying that rev share has nothing to do with the freight or logistics.
Nothing to do with that.
Totally separate. Yeah.
So when you look at the program in general, we're talking, you make bigger margins. You still have the easy button. It's super simple. You own the relationship with the carriers, and you can get an extra kickback from Zonos on top of all of it.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great segue to finishing this up. I think that you nailed it, and it's a mutually beneficial. I think there's a lot of win-wins going on here when Zonos is involved, where you have the 3PL that's winning because they're now making money on transportation, the carrier that's winning because they're now making more money on transportation. They have better margin because they don't have another third party in there taking some of that margin away. And then we're doing a rev share as well to the 3PL.
And I think that the 3PL being able to have that flexibility to offer what they're good at, right? Being able to, it's like you said, select their carriers, really tailor a solution around the merchant that they're working with is key here. Yeah. When I talk to 3PLs every single day, and one of their biggest issues with these other providers is they are in a box. And sometimes that does not work for the merchant that they're trying to either win business from or to continue to have their business. And if they try to stray outside of that box, that system breaks. And that is the biggest thing that I've seen with Zonos that's so key for these 3PLs is being able to offer custom solutions to every type of merchant they have and have that flexibility to kind of work within their ecosystem with our tools.
There's one aspect of this I think we did miss, and that is we talked about how margins and creating good solutions that are going to help their merchants succeed, but also from a 3PL they're trying to retain these merchants as customers, and they're also trying to attract new merchants. So Kermit, talk a little bit about how having a robust international program can help a 3PL attract new merchants and retain the ones they've got.
Absolutely. Before I mention that, so I want to say we're we've actually now created Zonos. It becomes the much easy button than any of the other players that we've talked about, because again, as you were saying, Clint, we control it from the very onset of the transaction all the way through the shipment and delivery. I think the fact that they can actually now, instead of segregating that volume of transportation to a secondary line for international business, they can now bring that volume of business back into their standard line of processing. So producing a shipping label is as easy and as simple as a domestic label. That's the objective that we can offer them, so that they're not actually having a secondary process. And then as far as how do we actually help them retain and keep those customers, make them a little more sticky. We make them more sticky because we're engaged on the front end of that checkout experience. So we're actually have a relationship with that merchant, providing a service and a value add that they can't get anywhere else. The fact that 3PL brought them to us, and we're integrated with a 3PL, not just with a rev share agreement, but integrated from the standpoint of actually producing all those customs documentations and customs labels. That's another integration that we have at the 3PL level. So we're integrated on the front end, we're integrated on the back end. We become really an integral part of that overall international solution for that merchant and for that 3PL. So the 3PL has a much better service offering than they had before. The merchant is happy. The end customer is happy because they're getting their products delivered more rapidly. And the 3PL is happy because we just took that entire nightmare of challenges away from them and gave them an easy button that has Zonos' name on it.
And I'd imagine, as far as attracting new customers, if there's merchants out there trying to go international with a 3PL that doesn't have a good solution in place, these 3PLs that do have a robust international offering are going to look extremely attractive.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, I think that's a good way to wrap up. Thank you, everybody, for having another conversation around 3PLs and hopefully better ways for them to grow international and how to tackle those challenges and get a whole lot more opportunities out there for them.
Thank you.